There's one emotion your brain is keeping you from, and it's secretly controlling your decisions every single day. Emotional blindness is one of the most powerful yet overlooked mechanisms of the human mind. It is not simply about being unaware of your feelings, nor is it the same as emotional suppression or avoidance that people commonly talk about in self-help circles. Emotional blindness is more subtle, more insidious, and ultimately far more influential over your behavior than most people realize. At its core, emotional blindness is the brain's way of protecting you from the full intensity of a particular emotion that it perceives as too threatening for your conscious mind to process. While you might think that being in touch with all your emotions is always beneficial, the truth is that the brain selectively hides certain feelings from you for reasons rooted in survival, adaptation, and control. The emotion that is most commonly hidden by this mechanism is fear, but not the obvious fear of immediate danger. It is fear in its raw, unfiltered form, the kind that strips away illusions, confronts your weaknesses, and forces you to face realities you might not want to admit. When you experience emotional blindness, you are not truly unaware of this fear. Instead, your subconscious has masked it with layers of distraction, rationalization, and alternative explanations that make the feeling less threatening and more manageable. You might notice patterns in your life where you avoid challenges, hesitate to act decisively, or consistently doubt yourself. Yet you cannot pinpoint why. That is emotional blindness at work, silently steering your decisions while keeping the true source of your hesitation hidden. Your brain has effectively become a Machiavellian strategist, crafting a protective illusion to maintain your stability and prevent psychological overwhelm. Because this mechanism operates largely outside of conscious awareness, people rarely recognize it. They may attribute their inaction to laziness, lack of confidence, or bad luck, but in reality, the emotional blind spot is orchestrating their behavior. The implications are profound. When you are emotionally blind to a powerful underlying fear, you lose control over your choices. You might reject opportunities, avoid confrontations, or settle for mediocrity without realizing that the true driver is a hidden emotional truth you are incapable of facing directly. Emotional blindness also creates a disconnect between your conscious reasoning and your instinctive reactions. You might plan and strategize with clarity, but when the moment comes to execute, subtle hesitations or unexplained anxiety interfere. The brain has already anticipated the emotional threat and is preemptively protecting you, even if it undermines your conscious goals. The danger of this mechanism is that it reinforces cycles of avoidance. The more you remain blind to certain emotions, the more your brain continues to manipulate your actions to shield you from them, creating patterns that are difficult to break. Emotional blindness can manifest in relationships, careers, and personal growth. In social interactions, you might instinctively avoid people who challenge your self-image or trigger unrecognized insecurities. Professionally, you may avoid tasks or decisions that could lead to failure, criticism, or exposure of your limitations, even when taking those risks could lead to significant growth. In personal development, emotional blindness keeps you from confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself, such as your dependency on validation, your fear of rejection, or your unwillingness to face failure. The mechanism works like a filter, allowing you to process emotions that are relatively safe while diverting attention away from those that could destabilize your psyche. This selective perception creates a distorted map of reality, where the unconscious mind is acutely aware of risks and threats, but the conscious mind believes it is acting freely. Recognizing emotional blindness requires a deliberate and disciplined approach. It demands that you pay attention to patterns of avoidance and hesitation, that you question your automatic reactions, and that you analyze the subtle ways your brain may be steering you away from certain experiences. It also requires emotional courage because the emotions hidden by this mechanism are rarely pleasant. Facing them can trigger discomfort, anxiety, or a sense of vulnerability that most people instinctively resist. Yet this resistance is exactly what emotional blindness is designed to exploit. By keeping you blind to your most intense emotions, your brain maintains control, preventing you from confronting truths that could be psychologically destabilizing, while still allowing those hidden emotions to influence your behavior in covert, powerful ways. Over time, emotional blindness can become self-reinforcing. Each time you unconsciously avoid a triggering emotion, your brain strengthens the pathways that make avoidance automatic, creating a feedback loop where you increasingly rely on distraction, rationalization, or superficial coping strategies rather than directly engaging with the underlying fear. This is why people can experience long periods of stagnation without understanding why they feel trapped or incapable of change. The key to breaking this cycle lies in cultivating awareness of your blind spots. By paying attention to the subtle signals of avoidance, hesitation, discomfort, rationalization, you can begin to map the areas of emotional blindness in your own psyche. Journaling, reflective meditation, and targeted self-inquiry can be effective tools for this exploration. The goal is not to force yourself into emotional overload, but to gradually and deliberately bring hidden emotions into conscious awareness, transforming them from unseen drivers of behavior into actionable information. This process can be uncomfortable and challenging, but it is also deeply empowering. Once you recognize the ways emotional blindness has been directing your choices, you gain the ability to make deliberate decisions that are no longer unconsciously constrained. You start to reclaim control of your life, acting with awareness rather than reaction. The hidden fears that once operated as invisible puppet strings become navigable territories, offering insight, clarity, and opportunity rather than limitation. Emotional blindness is not a flaw. It is an adaptive strategy. It evolved to protect you from the raw intensity of emotions that could overwhelm your cognitive and emotional capacity. However, like all protective strategies, it comes with trade-offs. While it shields you from immediate distress, it can also subtly imprison you in patterns of avoidance, mediocrity, and self-deception. Understanding this mechanism is one of the most potent steps you can take towards psychological mastery, self-mastery, and ultimately real power over your own mind. The challenge is to confront it intelligently, with discipline, courage, and strategic awareness, recognizing that the emotions your brain hides are not enemies to be feared, but signals to be interpreted, understood, and integrated into your conscious decision-making. Fear avoidance is one of the most powerful and underestimated forces shaping human behavior. Yet most people are completely unaware of its pervasive influence. Unlike ordinary fear that is obvious and immediate, fear avoidance operates beneath the surface, silently dictating decisions, limiting potential, and shaping the paths we take in life without our conscious consent. It is the reason why so many individuals settle for mediocrity, avoid confrontation, or repeatedly sabotage opportunities that could lead to success or fulfillment. At its core, fear avoidance is a strategy the mind uses to protect itself from emotional and psychological discomfort. The brain recognizes that certain situations, challenges, or experiences have the potential to trigger fear that is overwhelming or destabilizing, so it creates mechanisms to divert attention, postpone action, or rationalize inaction. These mechanisms are subtle and often disguised as practicality, logic, or self-preservation. For example, when someone hesitates to speak up in a meeting, avoid pursuing a promotion, or stay away from a potentially transformative relationship, it often appears to an observer as a lack of confidence, laziness, or poor judgment. In reality, it is fear avoidance. At work, an unconscious strategy designed to shield the individual from experiencing the raw, often uncomfortable emotions that could emerge if they faced the situation directly. This avoidance, however, is a double-edged sword. While it provides immediate psychological relief, it also reinforces patterns of limitation and passivity. Every time a person succumbs to fear avoidance, the brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with retreat and inhibition. Over time, these patterns become deeply ingrained, making it increasingly difficult to act courageously or embrace risk even when it is rational or necessary. The danger lies not in fear itself, but in the repeated and automatic avoidance of it. Fear avoidance becomes a subtle jailer, creating invisible boundaries that dictate where you go, what you pursue, and how far you allow yourself to grow. Many people spend entire lifetimes confined by these unseen walls, never realizing that the only obstacle standing between them and progress is the avoidance of an emotion that their brain has decided is too threatening to confront. In practical terms, fear avoidance manifests in countless ways. Professionally, it may present as hesitation to take on responsibilities, avoidance of high-stakes projects, or reluctance to negotiate for greater rewards. Socially, it can appear as an unwillingness to assert boundaries, confront toxic individuals, or engage with people who challenge your self-image. Emotionally, it can prevent introspection, self-awareness, and the processing of unresolved trauma or vulnerability. The underlying pattern is always the same. The brain identifies a source of fear and constructs a protective shield that keeps the emotion at bay while still allowing it to influence behavior in covert ways. The irony is that fear avoidance does not eliminate the fear. It simply displaces it. Unconfronted, the fear continues to shape decisions and actions, often in ways that are counterproductive or self-sabotaging. This is why individuals who habitually avoid fear can feel stuck, frustrated, or chronically anxious without understanding why. From a psychological standpoint, fear avoidance is intimately tied to the fight-or-flight response, but in a more sophisticated and chronic form. Instead of immediate physical reactions to danger, fear avoidance operates in cognitive and emotional domains, influencing planning, decision-making, and risk assessment. The brain calculates the potential threat of feeling fear, weighs it against perceived resources and capacity for coping, and often opts for the path of least emotional resistance. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. The more the individual avoids fear, the more sensitive the brain becomes to potential triggers, and the more it reinforces avoidance as the default strategy. Machiavellian psychology teaches us that understanding fear avoidance is essential for gaining real power over oneself. Those who recognize the patterns of avoidance can begin to intercept the automatic behaviors driven by hidden fear. By consciously identifying situations where avoidance occurs, analyzing the underlying emotional triggers, and deliberately choosing to act despite discomfort, individuals can gradually retrain the brain to tolerate fear without letting it dictate their decisions. This process is neither easy nor comfortable. Fear avoidance is deeply entrenched, and confronting it requires emotional courage, mental discipline, and strategic insight. The initial confrontation with avoidance can feel destabilizing because it exposes the raw, unfiltered emotion that has been concealed for years. The fear that arises is often more intense than anticipated precisely because the mind has been hiding from it. Yet this is exactly why the process is transformative. By facing the fear that the brain has tried to protect you from, you gain access to a reservoir of power and clarity previously unavailable. This is the essence of turning fear avoidance into a tool rather than a limitation. You learn to see fear not as an enemy, but as a signal, a piece of information that guides strategic action. The awareness of avoidance patterns allows you to differentiate between rational caution and subconscious retreat. Rational caution is a calculated response to genuine risk, whereas fear avoidance is often disproportionate, irrational, and protective to a fault. Understanding this distinction is critical because it enables you to act decisively in situations where avoidance has previously held you back. In relationships, fear avoidance often manifests as an unwillingness to engage in deep, vulnerable conversations or to confront emotional truths. This avoidance can protect you from temporary discomfort but ultimately erodes trust, intimacy, and authentic connection. In business or personal ambition, fear avoidance may prevent you from pursuing opportunities, making bold decisions, or asserting your value. It may disguise itself as practicality, patience, or prudence, but its true nature is a protective mechanism designed to keep you in a psychological comfort zone, even at the expense of growth and achievement. The challenge in overcoming fear avoidance is that it is deeply intertwined with identity. People often define themselves by the boundaries and limitations created by avoidance. When confronted with the reality of avoidance, there can be a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. The part of the mind that has relied on avoidance for protection resists exposure, while the conscious mind recognizes the cost of staying blind. Overcoming this requires strategic introspection, deliberate exposure, and the cultivation of self-awareness. Techniques such as reflective journaling, deliberate risk-taking, and emotional desensitization can help to gradually dismantle the avoidance mechanisms. The goal is not to eliminate fear or emotional protection entirely, but to integrate the previously avoided emotions into conscious awareness. By doing so, fear becomes a tool rather than a chain. It informs strategy, sharpens perception, and enhances decision-making without allowing the hidden emotion to dictate outcomes unconsciously. Fear avoidance, when understood and managed, can become a pathway to mastery over self, providing insight into previously invisible motivators, exposing hidden desires, and revealing the psychological levers that govern behavior. It is one of the most powerful levers of personal transformation, because it sits at the intersection of subconscious influence and conscious choice. Those who master the recognition and strategic navigation of fear avoidance gain the ability to act decisively in circumstances where others hesitate to pursue goals, others fear to approach, and to confront realities that most prefer to ignore. It is the silent architect of both limitation and potential, a shadowy force that can either imprison or liberate, depending on one's awareness and courage. And understanding its mechanisms is a crucial step in gaining real, unshakable psychological power. Subconscious protection is one of the most fascinating and influential mechanisms of the human mind. A silent strategist working behind the scenes to ensure your survival, stability, and psychological comfort, often without your conscious awareness. While most people think of their decisions and emotions as being primarily guided by conscious thought, the reality is that the subconscious mind orchestrates far more than we realize. Subconscious protection is the brain's way of anticipating threats, emotional, social, or psychological, and creating automatic safeguards to prevent you from experiencing pain, overwhelm, or destabilization. It is not inherently conscious or rational. It operates like a hidden executive, assessing patterns, predicting outcomes, and deploying protective measures before the conscious mind has time to react. This mechanism is adaptive, evolutionary in nature, and essential for maintaining psychological integrity. Without it, humans would be exposed to every emotional spike, every fear, and every vulnerability, leaving the mind and body in a constant state of strain. However, as powerful as it is for protection, subconscious protection also comes with hidden costs, shaping your behavior in ways that often go unnoticed but have profound consequences for your growth, relationships, and ambitions. The mind, in its effort to shield you from harm, will frequently generate avoidance behaviors, rationalizations, and cognitive distortions that mask the true nature of your feelings and motivations. For example, when you procrastinate on a task that challenges your self-esteem or exposes you to potential criticism, the subconscious is deploying protection. It is diverting your attention from potential discomfort, fear of failure, or emotional vulnerability. This is why so many people are mystified by their own patterns of avoidance. They cannot understand why they consistently hesitate, self-sabotage, or make choices that seem contrary to their conscious goals. The answer lies in the subtle yet powerful work of subconscious protection. It is a mechanism that is rarely discussed because it operates beneath the threshold of awareness, influencing behavior in ways that appear natural, automatic, or justified. Subconscious protection is not limited to fear. It can operate in response to shame, guilt, trauma, vulnerability, or even the anticipation of social rejection. The brain identifies experiences or emotions that are too threatening or destabilizing to process consciously and develops strategies to shield you from them. These strategies are often complex and multifaceted. They can involve redirecting attention, suppressing emotional responses, reframing experiences, or even altering perception of reality in subtle ways. For example, you might unconsciously minimize a failure by convincing yourself it wasn't important, or you might exaggerate the difficulty of a task to justify avoidance. These are not flaws, They are the brain's protective maneuvers designed to maintain equilibrium while still allowing you to function in everyday life. However, the protective strategies of the subconscious can also be limiting. When the brain constantly shields you from uncomfortable emotions, it simultaneously restricts growth, creativity, and personal empowerment. The very mechanisms that prevent emotional overwhelm also prevent full engagement with reality. You may remain blind to patterns in your behavior, unaware of the fears and insecurities that subtly dictate your choices. In essence, subconscious protection can create a prison of invisibility where you believe you are acting freely and rationally, while hidden emotional drivers quietly shape your decisions, reactions, and life trajectory. Understanding subconscious protection is a critical step toward mastering your mind. It begins with awareness, recognizing that much of your behavior is influenced by protective mechanisms that are not inherently conscious. By observing patterns of hesitation, avoidance, rationalization, and subtle self-sabotage, you can start to identify where subconscious protection is active. This is not an exercise in self-judgment. It is a strategic acknowledgement of the internal forces that shape you. The next step is interpretation. Each protective behavior is a signal, a piece of information that reveals what your subconscious mind perceives as threatening or destabilizing. For example, if you consistently avoid confrontation, it may not simply be fear of conflict. It may be a deeper protection against the emotional intensity of shame, guilt, or rejection. If you procrastinate on tasks that could elevate your status, it may not be laziness, but a shield against the fear of failure, criticism, or exposure. Recognizing these patterns allows you to differentiate between genuine risk and subconscious defense, giving you clarity and insight into the hidden levers of your mind. The third step is deliberate engagement. Once you identify where subconscious protection is influencing behavior, you can begin to confront it strategically. This requires emotional courage, disciplined introspection, and the willingness to tolerate discomfort in pursuit of growth and mastery. The goal is not to eliminate protection entirely. The brain's safeguards are adaptive and necessary, but to integrate awareness of these mechanisms into conscious decision-making. By doing so, you transform subconscious protection from an invisible constraint into a strategic tool. When harnessed correctly, subconscious protection can enhance your ability to anticipate threats, manage risk, and navigate complex emotional landscapes. Instead of being blindsided by fear, shame, or vulnerability, you can use the insights provided by your protective mechanisms to prepare, strategize, and act decisively. This is a key principle of psychological power, the ability to turn automatic, unconscious defenses into deliberate, conscious leverage. Subconscious protection also plays a central role in resilience. Because it shields you from the immediate intensity of threatening emotions, it allows you to maintain functionality under stress, recover from setbacks, and continue pursuing long-term goals, even when faced with adversity. The challenge is that this same protective force can create blind spots, preventing you from fully confronting the internal and external realities necessary for growth. The most successful individuals in any field, whether in business, relationships, or personal mastery, learn to navigate these blind spots intentionally. They observe the protective tendencies of their mind, interpret the underlying signals, and choose to act despite the instinct to retreat. This conscious engagement with subconscious protection is what separates reactive individuals from strategic actors. It is also what creates the sense of psychological freedom that others rarely achieve. The paradox of subconscious protection is that it is both a prison and a tool. Left unchecked, it can confine you, limit your choices, and reinforce patterns of avoidance. Understood and engaged with strategically, it becomes a guide, a source of insight, and a mechanism for enhanced decision-making and self-mastery. The process of mastering subconscious protection requires patience, discipline, and curiosity. You must be willing to explore the hidden corners of your mind, observe patterns without judgment, and confront emotions that have long been obscured. This engagement is inherently Machiavellian. It is a form of psychological strategy where understanding your internal landscape allows you to exert influence over your own behavior rather than being unconsciously manipulated by it. In practical terms, the mastery of subconscious protection manifests in clearer decision-making, greater emotional resilience, and the ability to pursue high-stakes opportunities without being unconsciously deterred by fear or discomfort. It enables you to recognize when avoidance is protective versus when it is limiting, to differentiate rational caution from habitual retreat, and to act with deliberate intention even in situations that would previously trigger automatic defensive responses. Those who cultivate this awareness develop an uncanny ability to anticipate the hidden dynamics of both their own mind and the minds of others, leveraging the subtle interplay between subconscious protection and conscious strategy to navigate complex social, professional, and emotional environments with precision. Subconscious protection is, in essence, a silent partner in every decision you make, every fear you confront, and every boundary you establish. Recognizing it, understanding it, and learning to engage with it strategically transforms what was once a hidden constraint into a source of insight, power, and mastery. Hidden anxiety triggers are one of the most subtle and influential forces shaping human behavior. Yet most people remain completely unaware of their existence. Unlike overt stressors or obvious fears, these triggers operate beneath the surface, silently shaping your decisions, reactions, and emotional state in ways that often feel mysterious or irrational. They are the subconscious cues, memories, or associations that provoke anxiety without your conscious recognition, and they are intimately tied to both your past experiences and the protective strategies of your mind. These triggers can emerge from seemingly innocuous events, a casual remark, a particular environment, a gesture, or even a fleeting thought, but their impact on behavior can be profound, influencing choices, limiting potential, and creating internal resistance. Hidden anxiety triggers are often the result of the brain's adaptive mechanisms designed to protect you from perceived threats. The mind catalogs past experiences that were emotionally intense or psychologically destabilizing, encoding them as patterns that signal danger. Later, even when a situation is objectively safe, subtle cues reminiscent of past distress can activate the anxiety response, causing physiological, emotional, and cognitive effects as if the threat were present again. This is why certain situations feel inexplicably uncomfortable, even when there is no immediate danger. The brain, operating like a covert strategist, is reminding you of what it perceives as risk, leveraging anxiety as both a warning and a protective tool. The challenge is that these triggers often go unrecognized, leading individuals to misattribute their discomfort or hesitation. People may blame themselves for being overly sensitive, for lacking confidence, or for failing to act decisively, when in reality their behavior is being shaped by hidden, subconscious triggers. These triggers operate with a level of sophistication that is both fascinating and insidious. They are selective, context-dependent, and often disguised as rational thought or emotional preference. For instance, someone might avoid pursuing a high-stakes opportunity, convincing themselves that it is impractical, when in fact, a hidden anxiety trigger tied to past failure or humiliation is influencing their decision. Similarly, in social interactions, a person may unconsciously withdraw from individuals who evoke subtle reminders of prior rejection, embarrassment, or disapproval. The result is a complex web of avoidance behaviors, rationalizations, and emotional self-protection that can feel completely natural, even though it is being driven by hidden anxiety. Understanding hidden anxiety triggers requires both self-awareness and psychological insight. It is not enough to recognize the presence of anxiety. One must also trace the underlying patterns, associations, and past experiences that activate it. This often involves examining recurring emotional reactions, identifying situations where discomfort is disproportionate to the actual risk, and reflecting on the memories, beliefs, or expectations that may be connected to these responses. In many cases, hidden anxiety triggers are linked to formative experiences in childhood, social conditioning, or significant life events that left emotional imprints. These imprints are stored in the subconscious and can influence behavior decades later, often without any conscious awareness. The brain, in its role as protector, uses these triggers to prevent you from re-experiencing emotional pain, embarrassment, or instability, even if avoiding the situation also limits growth, opportunity, and self-expression. The insidious aspect of hidden anxiety triggers is that they operate below the level of conscious thought, creating patterns that are difficult to detect and even harder to control. They shape decision-making, interpersonal dynamics, and risk assessment in ways that feel automatic. A person may rationalize their avoidance as prudence, strategy, or self-interest, when in reality, their behavior is being subtly guided by the subconscious activation of anxiety. From a Machiavellian perspective, understanding these hidden triggers is a form of psychological leverage. Those who recognize the underlying causes of their anxiety gain the ability to predict, intercept, and strategically respond to situations that would otherwise provoke unconscious withdrawal or hesitation. By mapping the specific cues that activate anxiety, individuals can develop deliberate strategies to neutralize their influence, either by confronting the triggers directly, reframing their emotional response, or gradually desensitizing themselves to the situations that once caused automatic anxiety. This process requires courage and disciplined introspection. Confronting hidden anxiety triggers often involves revisiting uncomfortable memories, acknowledging vulnerabilities, and tolerating the initial surge of emotional discomfort that arises when the subconscious protection mechanisms are challenged. It is precisely this discomfort that the mind has been trying to prevent, which is why the process of uncovering and integrating these triggers is so transformative. Successfully navigating hidden anxiety triggers allows for unprecedented levels of self-mastery. By bringing subconscious cues into conscious awareness, you regain control over decisions, actions, and emotional responses that were previously influenced without your consent. Anxiety ceases to be an invisible puppet master and instead becomes a source of information and insight. It signals areas where growth, learning, or confrontation may be necessary, allowing you to act with strategic precision rather than unconscious hesitation. Hidden anxiety triggers also play a critical role in interpersonal dynamics. Many social conflicts, miscommunications, and relational patterns are rooted in these subconscious activations. A slight tone of voice, a facial expression, or a remembered insult can unconsciously activate anxiety, influencing responses, choices, and behaviors in ways that may appear irrational or disproportionate to others. Recognizing these triggers enables individuals to take control of their reactions, maintain composure, and respond intentionally rather than reflexively. In professional settings, the implications are equally significant. Hidden anxiety triggers can limit performance, undermine leadership, and restrict ambition. Tasks that involve public scrutiny, high stakes, or potential failure may provoke unconscious anxiety that manifests as procrastination, indecision, or perfectionism. By identifying the triggers and understanding their origin, one can take strategic steps to neutralize the protective influence of anxiety, allowing for bold, calculated action that aligns with conscious objectives. It is important to note that the goal is not to eliminate anxiety entirely. Anxiety, when managed consciously, is a powerful signal and motivator. It heightens awareness, prepares the body for challenge, and guides attention toward potential risks. The problem arises when hidden triggers manipulate behavior unconsciously, creating avoidance, self-doubt, and missed opportunities. By bringing these triggers into conscious awareness, one transforms anxiety from a covert controller into a deliberate advisor. The process of understanding hidden anxiety triggers is also deeply empowering because it reveals the sophistication of the mind's protective mechanisms. What feels like arbitrary discomfort or irrational hesitation is, in fact, a highly evolved system designed to preserve emotional equilibrium and protect the individual from destabilizing experiences. Recognizing this allows for a shift in perspective. Anxiety is not an enemy to be eradicated, but a signal to be interpreted, understood, and strategically managed. Mastery of hidden anxiety triggers requires consistent observation, self-reflection, and targeted behavioral experimentation. By paying close attention to emotional patterns, physiological responses, and situational cues, one can begin to map the triggers that influence behavior. Gradual exposure, cognitive reframing, and deliberate action against avoidance patterns enable the brain to recalibrate its protective responses, reducing the unconscious influence of anxiety and allowing conscious intention to guide behavior. Those who achieve this mastery gain a form of psychological advantage that most people never realize exists. They are able to act decisively, maintain composure under stress, and pursue opportunities that would otherwise provoke retreat. Their decisions are guided by conscious evaluation rather than hidden triggers, creating a sense of freedom, control, and personal power. Hidden anxiety triggers are, in essence, invisible architects of behavior. They shape choices, influence reactions, and constrain potential, all while remaining largely unrecognized. Understanding them is a prerequisite for true self-mastery. By bringing these triggers into conscious awareness, interpreting their signals, and engaging with them deliberately, individuals can transform anxiety from a covert limitation into a source of strategic insight, ultimately gaining control over the emotional currents that influence their mind, actions, and life trajectory. Mental self-defense is one of the most crucial and underappreciated skills for anyone seeking mastery over their mind, emotions, and life circumstances. While many people focus on physical safety, strategic thinking, or even emotional intelligence, mental self-defense operates on a deeper, more subtle level. It is the ability to recognize, intercept, and neutralize psychological attacks, manipulations, and internal threats before they have the chance to influence decisions or control behavior. This skill is not simply about building resilience in the face of stress. It is about cultivating an internal fortress capable of protecting the mind from both external and internal pressures that could compromise judgment, power, or personal integrity. Mental self-defense begins with awareness. Without awareness, the mind is vulnerable to hidden forces, subtle manipulations, hidden anxieties, emotional blind spots, and subconscious protections that dictate behavior without conscious consent. Awareness requires observing one's own thoughts, feelings, and reactions as objectively as possible. It involves identifying patterns of automatic responses, recurring doubts, and emotional triggers that consistently shape decisions and actions. These patterns are often invisible to the untrained mind because the brain has evolved to protect itself from the overwhelming intensity of certain emotions, using mechanisms such as avoidance, rationalization, and distraction. Recognizing these patterns is the first line of defense because it exposes the psychological levers that can be exploited, intentionally or unintentionally, by external influences or by one's own subconscious. Once awareness is established, the next element of mental self-defense is understanding the sources of influence and potential threats. In daily life, threats are rarely overt. They come disguised as casual comments, social pressures, internalized beliefs, or fleeting doubts. Manipulative individuals, whether in personal relationships, workplaces, or social environments, often exploit these subtle vulnerabilities to influence behavior, undermine confidence, or gain leverage. Mental self-defense equips an individual to identify these manipulations before they take root, allowing for strategic response rather than reactive compliance. This is where the Machiavellian aspect of mental self-defense becomes essential. Just as historical strategists anticipated the moves of their adversaries and prepared contingencies, a person practicing mental self-defense anticipates emotional and psychological challenges, understanding both their own vulnerabilities and the tactics that others may use to exploit them. The ability to remain calm, deliberate, and calculated under pressure is a hallmark of true psychological power. A critical component of mental self-defense is the management of internal threats, those subtle, often invisible forces that originate within the mind itself. These include fear, doubt, self-sabotage, overthinking, and unconscious emotional triggers. Left unexamined, these internal forces can manipulate perception, distort reality, and limit the ability to act decisively. Mental self-defense requires training the mind to recognize these internal threats, understand their origins, and respond strategically rather than reflexively. This is why practices such as introspection, journaling, meditation, and cognitive reframing are integral to developing mental self-defense. They cultivate the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them, allowing for conscious selection of responses rather than automatic reactions. Another essential aspect of mental self-defense is emotional regulation. The brain is designed to prioritize survival over logic, which means that intense emotions, particularly fear, anger, and anxiety, can hijack decision-making if not managed. Mental self-defense equips an individual to recognize the onset of these emotional states and implement strategies to maintain clarity, focus, and control. This does not mean suppressing emotion or avoiding it entirely. Rather, it means acknowledging the emotion, understanding its source, and choosing how to act in a way that aligns with conscious goals rather than unconscious impulses. Strategic detachment is another key principle. Mental self-defense involves creating a psychological buffer between stimulus and response. By developing the capacity to pause, analyze, and interpret events before reacting, a person gains the advantage of deliberate action. This buffer allows one to identify manipulative tactics, emotional triggers, or misleading narratives and respond in a manner that preserves personal power, autonomy, and strategic advantage. In social dynamics, mental self-defense is particularly valuable. Manipulation, deceit, and psychological games are common in personal and professional environments. The ability to detect subtle cues, anticipate ulterior motives, and maintain composure under pressure transforms interactive engagements into calculated exercises of influence and self-preservation. This requires not only awareness and observation, but also the ability to regulate emotional responses, interpret underlying intentions, and respond with clarity and precision. Mental self-defense also includes the proactive cultivation of cognitive and emotional resilience. Just as physical training strengthens muscles, deliberate mental exercises fortify the mind against psychological stressors. This can involve challenging cognitive biases, exposing oneself to discomfort strategically, and practicing decision-making under controlled pressure. Each of these exercises increases the capacity to withstand external and internal pressures, reducing susceptibility to manipulation and enhancing overall psychological strength. Another critical element is the discernment of truth versus perception. The mind is constantly bombarded with information, both internal and external, and not all of it is accurate, beneficial, or aligned with reality. Mental self-defense requires developing the ability to evaluate information critically, separate fact from interpretation, and recognize distortions caused by emotion, bias, or manipulation. This discernment is essential because acting on flawed perceptions can compromise decision-making and personal power. Over time, the consistent practice of mental self-defense leads to the development of a kind of psychological immunity. Just as the immune system learns to recognize and neutralize threats to the body, the mind becomes capable of recognizing manipulative tactics, emotional hijacks, and subconscious influences before they have the opportunity to compromise thought or action. This immunity is cumulative and self-reinforcing. The more one practices awareness, observation, emotional regulation, and strategic response, the more adept the mind becomes at maintaining autonomy and control. Importantly, mental self-defense is not about isolating oneself from influence or emotion. It is about mastery over influence and emotion. It allows for strategic engagement with the world rather than unconscious reaction. A person skilled in mental self-defense can participate fully in relationships, leadership, negotiation, and high-stakes environments while remaining grounded, aware, and in control of their own mind. Finally, mental self-defense is a lifelong practice. The mind is dynamic, and new challenges, experiences, and relationships continually present opportunities for both growth and vulnerability. The principles of awareness, observation, emotional regulation, strategic detachment, cognitive resilience, and discernment are not static skills but ongoing practices that must be refined continuously. Those who commit to this practice develop an unshakable psychological foundation, the kind of internal fortress that allows them to act decisively, navigate complexity, and maintain power over both internal and external forces. Mental self-defense is, in essence, the mastery of one's inner domain, the ability to anticipate, interpret, and strategically respond to the myriad influences that shape thought, emotion, and behavior. It is the final line of defense against unconscious manipulation, hidden anxieties, emotional blind spots, and the subtle pressures of the social world, and its mastery transforms the mind from a reactive instrument into a tool of deliberate, calculated, and unstoppable psychological power. Master your mind, face the hidden fears, and you'll discover a power within you that no one and nothing can take away.